The Field Between. My name is Ahmed.
I'm Yasmin, and we're joined today by such a special guest.
Yes, we're joined by Abdul Rahman Latif, who has a new book out called Vultures in the House of Silence.
Assalamu alaikum. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Abdul Rahman, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
No, absolutely. So my name is Abdul Rahman Latif. I am an author recently, alhamdulillah, finally. But also I'm a chaplain at Dartmouth College. I'm the Muslim chaplain over there. I help with the running of the Religious Life Center. I'm also a PhD candidate on leave at Columbia in religion. And, I had a background in religious studies, Islamic studies. And that's actually how I know Yasmin, because we did our masters together.
That's right.
Yes, HDS.
How much did you two overlap?
We were in the same cohort. We were in the program for 2 years. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there weren't that many of us in Islamic studies, so alhamdulillah, we got to take some classes together and all that. And then we did not overlap then, but I think we've seen you at least once in North Carolina because you were at Duke for your undergrad, right? Until you go back there sometimes.
We saw you at the alumni.
So I visited for like a day or two and ran into y'all then. And that's when I got to meet Ahmed, alhamdulillah.
Right. But you didn't grow up in North Carolina, right? I was trying to remember where you grew up randomly. Did you grow up in the D.C. area?
So I grew up in actually rural Maryland, so in the Appalachian part of it.
Oh, gotcha.
Wow. So what years were you in Durham?
So I was there 2012 to 2016. Did my undergrad over there, and alhamdulillah, I enjoyed the weather. Wow.
Yeah, we're missing that. I'm sure you're feeling similarly now. And I guess
he's in California
you're in California, but being in New Hampshire, we're in Pittsburgh now, and I'm like, the South changed me. I'm cold all the time.
I totally understand that. No, because I'm living in New Hampshire. Last year there was a day where it was negative 20 degrees.
Oh my
gosh! But with wind chill, it was negative 40.
I can't even fathom that. I don't even know what that feels like.
Exactly. It doesn't feel like anything because you just cannot feel when you're out in that weather. You just can't feel.
That's crazy. 40? And yeah, I can't even imagine that. And you got married relatively recently, right? Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been a little over 6 months now.
Wow, mabruk.
Very
so we're rounding up to a year now,
Yeah.
yeah. That's awesome.
That's awesome.
And your wife also I can strike this if you want, but like very successful in her own right. So works for Palestine Legal, and I've seen lately that they have had some great successes, especially in Florida.
Yeah, mashallah, no, it's an incredible organization, and they're doing great work, very timely work. She started working there right before October 7th.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, good for her.
So if you could just give us like a quick synopsis or sales pitch for the book and tell us what it's about. I'll let you explain it, Abdul Rahman, but it's kind of, like a sci-fi fantasy Muslim story that I think you describe it. What's the tagline? It is like like a Persian epic meets The Witcher.
So Vultures in the House of Silence is a Middle Eastern / Islamicate. I know people have problems with that words, but Islamicate.
I love Islamicate. Continue.
There you go. Dark fantasy novel. It's between young adult and new adult, so I think readers of both ages can get to it. The way I like to pitch it is The Witcher meets Avatar: The Last Airbender in medieval Baghdad, or Persian epics meet shonen manga. A more recent one is Percy Jackson converts to Islam. But really, it is a fantasy novel rooted in medieval Muslim tradition and time period, and combination of native storytelling and then also this very modern genre fiction, because I was kind of steeped in both as I was producing the work. It's about a gardener who wakes up surrounded, amidst corpses, being pecked at by vultures, and he has to tell a story to prevent the vultures from pecking at him. And ensues this tale of sorrow and grief and loss and attempts at gaining hope. He, through a series of dreams and supernatural encounters, he comes to the conclusion that these wicked sorcerers called the Servants are trying to do something, terrible, to conquer the world, achieve world domination, whatever it is. And he is blessed in a way where he has the ability to find allies through some sort of secret supernatural sense. And he goes on this journey to kind of find allies and combat them. But unfortunately, he finds mostly monsters instead.
okay, I mean, I guess I could just be bullshitting you, but I'm not. There's this like moment where you like agree to read something from someone you know in one context and you're like, oh, I hope I like it. And like, I really, really loved it. Like I was really relieved and excited.
It was
Yeah, it was just so rich. I have so many questions.
Yeah.
I guess the first question I want to ask, just because I know your background a little bit, and I'm trying to remember, and I mean, it may have changed. This is a long time ago, but when I knew you, I thought that you were kind of specializing, and not that your academic research obviously had to perfectly line up with this, but it is so rich in references. You were specializing in like Ottoman history, right?
Yeah. So I guess first, just one, thank you for reading it, and
Of
I'm
course.
glad you liked it. When you self-publish a novel, and I guess when you uh, do academia for a while and your writing really suffers because of that, you always
Yeah.
wonder, like, well, people like what I write. Is it going to be legible? It doesn't matter how many people tell me they like it. Every time I'd be like, really? So definitely feel this. Jazakallah khair. But yeah, so back in our masters, I was on my Ottoman tip.
Yeah.
I in undergrad, I'd done like a study abroad in Turkey. Been exposed to archives, etc. I was like, wow, this is incredible. I think as I started my PhD, I started to say like that stuff is very, very cool, but I want to focus on that. And so I started working on Persian, started working on older stuff. My advisor does early Islamic history, which is very different. And I kind of came to the conclusion that what I really liked more than any particular historical time period was the idea of storytelling and
Hmm.
storytelling traditions and how they change and how they transform. So I ended up doing my exams on something completely different. My subfield exams were on like Sufism in Morocco randomly. It wasn't something I
Interesting.
was. Yeah, no, it's because I think the advisor for that subfield, Brinkley Messick, was like, yeah, this is what you should do. I was like, I want to do something Sufism, et cetera, anthropologic. And he's like, this is what we're going to focus on as like the particulars. And then with my advisor, it was on early Islamic history, advisor Najm Haider. And then the last exam I took with Manakia, and this was the one that I really got to work very carefully with her on picking the works, was on Islamic storytelling traditions.
Hmm.
And so I think this book evolved in a way from all of those bits. You can see that the Tasawwuf in there pretty clearly. I think it's, definitely low hanging fruit. But also, I'd done this exam on early Islamic history, and we classified that as like up to the Mongol conquest. So, this book takes place right after. And then, the storytelling traditions thing, like I was joking about like the Persian epics meets The Witcher meets shonen manga, etc. Semi a joke, but those are the things where I was reading right before I wrote this. Like I was just
Yeah.
binging those type of things. So
That's so cool to see all those influences. So the story takes place in Baghdad right after the Mongols invade. It's the end of the Abbasid Empire as people knew it. It's a really interesting time to pick. What made you want to pick that time as the setting?
I think I wrote this during COVID, and it was
Mm.
just this moment of obviously nothing comparable, but like this feeling of like emptiness, devastation, etc. And so as I was trying to cope with my own feelings in that moment, I gravitated partly because of the exams and the reading that I had been doing, but a time period I'd been thinking about was the Mongol conquest. And so I kind of tied that together. And then I had this idea about saints being important to the story, this resurrection of these actual historical villains, by the way. These are real, like Bayan, Mughira, all these villains that are mentioned, they're actual people in
Really,
history.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'll talk to them in a minute, maybe. But I was like, okay, how do I bring them back? Obviously there are tons of saints in after the Mongol conquest. I mean, like a lot of Sufi orders really take off then. Rumi was still alive during that time period. There's so many things going
Right.
on. You know, uh,
Rumi's family had
Khuzestan
to
was
move
written right
because
after.
right.
Mhm. Yeah, they had to move like a little bit early because of that. And Khuzestan was written like that year or the next year. So like obviously it's there, but I was like, I want to fixate on this devastation and kind of coming out of this devastation, working through grief, and also having a historical context of why things were the way they were that would allow the story to take place.
And did you have to do a lot of research, or was a lot of this kind of like already? Because I was just so impressed by the depth of references. Was a lot of this kind of you'd already done the reading, or did you have to kind of go back and like reread some Persian epics and reread some Sufi stories?
So for the most part, it was just again, I just like worked on my
Finished,
subfield
yeah.
exams, so that was like the moment when it was all in my head. So there are a lot of like small references that they were just like they were there, low hanging fruit. The one thing that I did have to do a little bit of research or change was that I wrote this to be in Mesopotamia, to be in Iraq, and I'd never visited before. And about a year after I'd started writing, I went, on ziyarah to visit all the different Sunni and Shia sites
Mm.
in Iraq, with a good friend of mine, and I made a point that like, some of the journey overlapped with some of the journey in the book, just a little bit, just enough that I'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, like actually that doesn't work, or geographically that's a little bit weird. So I managed to kind of resituate everything and do a little bit of rewriting after that, just to make sure that it was actually uh, semi-geographically accurate.
Wow. What was that like? What were some of the sites you visited?
Oh no, it was incredible. I highly recommend, if you haven't been to Iraq, like please
We
go.
both
It is
really want to go,
amazing.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah, inshallah soon. It is incredible. And we did like a pretty like whirlwind tour. We went to Madain, where part of the book takes place. We went to Karbala, Najaf, Samarra, Baghdad, uh, and then like some smaller towns, Dhul Kifl, we went to
Wow.
Kufa. Like it's all within the same region. I think everything there is within like 50 to 100 miles from each other.
Hmm.
But just getting a sense of the landscape helped. And obviously the landscape's changed, and like knowing that allows for a little bit of anachronism
Yeah,
and
creative license.
creative license, because it has become more aridized over time. But just the power of the river, the environment, like there's so many things. SubhanAllah.
Yeah, that's incredible. So one thing that is in your books that figures very prominently is dreams as kind of vehicles for revelation, and I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about that. And also, I was wondering while I was reading this, are there dreams that maybe you've had that you've kind of
Ooh,
carried with you that are like very vivid? Because I know I have some that I'm like I still
same.
don't understand this, and I think about it every once in a while.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. I mean, uh, like I think there's a tradition of the Prophet ﷺ about like dreams being 1/99th or 1/100th of prophecy.
Yeah.
And there's this notion that a dream is a way of connecting with the divine, potentially, right? And it's not actual revelation, but it may give you some insight. That dreams are the closest we can get to the ghaib, the unseen sometimes. And in Muslim cultures, there's so much literature, Ibn Sirin and beyond, about dream interpretation, significance, etc. There's also that multi-classification of dreams. Like there are true dreams, there are, and as is mentioned very early on in the book, there are false dreams, like deceptive dreams, and then there's just that natural things that come because we're thinking about different things. I think Freud was largely wrong, but some of the dream interpretation stuff he said might be right, and depending on the circumstance, because it's just something so vast. And so that interplay of what is a true dream, what is a not a true dream, where do the dreams come from? I think it's very important in the beginning of the novel, and it surfaces later on without spoiling anything.
Yeah.
But also, I was kind of like pulling when I did that, I was pulling from a few other sources, right? So, uh, in like origin stories, quite often in Muslim tradition, you have a dream that appears, right? When the Ottoman Empire was founded, going back to those type of studies, there's an alleged dream that Osman Bey had of this tree, growing, I think, from his navel or something like that, encompassing a large chunk of the world. And whether it's true or not, it tells you something about, okay, this is where something starts, or where it begins. So for my story to kind of fit in the Muslim tradition, it's like I need a dream at the beginning. And some feedback I'd gotten early on, on an earlier draft was, well, it's really cliche in the fantasy genre to have like dreams. But I was like, no, but like contextually, this is really important. If I'm doing the fantastical in the Muslim setting, like I need a dream.
Yeah.
But then I added more dreams as the story went on to, add to the tension of the story, but also I was a little bit inspired by the Wheel of Time. So I'd read that series like way back, I think like high school period. And there was these recurring freaky dreams. And there's a lot good about the series. There's a lot not so good about the series. But again, great inspiration. Robert Jordan did a fantastic job of just like paving the way for the field. And so I took that element. I was like, oh, recurring dreams. Like that's a nice way of bringing things back, and then I can nativize it and loop it into the Islamic tradition.
So I'm gathering, have you had a long-standing interest in like fantasy genre, and have you tried this kind of writing before, or have you just been kind of someone who enjoyed reading it?
No, I've had a very long interest in the genre. I love reading fiction in general. As someone who's been doing academia for a while, and now doing maybe academia adjacent work, uh, there's my escape. Since I was a kid, and I don't say it as escape as in like trying to just remove myself from reality, but trying to reinforce myself for reality.
Hmm.
to recharge, to go back to those core morals, core values, to see difference in the most radical sense sometimes, and then come back and sit with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I've a novel binging problem. Since we got married, my wife will have to stop me sometimes. She's like, no, stop reading.
Stop. Yeah.
Not in a controlling way, not at all. But
No,
like
no,
she's
no.
like,
It's
it's
fair.
like 2 a.m. Like, go to sleep.
This is not quite the same thing, but I was so burned out after taking my comps. That's sort of how I started getting into poetry. It was the only thing that I could read, that I enjoyed reading, and it felt like such a joy to enjoy reading.
Yeah.
And to
Exactly.
like find an emotional connection in an emotional world through reading. So I definitely hear that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like,
I think for me, the first time I ever really had any experience with like any sort of, I mean, you were talking about writing this in, pandemic and this kind of moment that was experienced by a lot of people as apocalyptic, right? Like it wasn't just pandemic, right? Like it really felt like we were watching the world fall apart in a lot of different ways. There were all these wildfires, remember those pictures of like California and I think maybe New York just looking orange from, and so
Police repression of the BLM protests.
A lot of things just coming to a head that I felt like it was an important moment. For us, it was the moment that Yasmin and I kind of like started to know each other and fell in love. But for me, it was also my first exposure to Sufi poetry, because I think I was looking for something that really helped me go beyond myself and like connect spiritually, because I think there was just like such a deep desire to do that and learn more. So yeah, I want to go back actually, so to the dreams thing, and then also to some of the themes. And one of the things that I really appreciated, I really like Lovecraft.
I'm looking at a shelf right now that is filled with Lovecraft books.
Yeah. So
you got the Lovecraft reference.
Yes, so I love the Lovecraft references, and I was also wondering, like, a lot of the way that you structure this, or not a lot of the way, but like it shares some similarities, especially with the dreams, right? Like in Lovecraft stories, there are a lot of people who have these dreams and visions, and even when I've written campaigns, because I've played like tabletop Call of Cthulhu stuff. I don't know if you've ever played, but and if you have, we should maybe figure out the time.
I've always kind of. We'll talk about it later.
No, say it. Do you want? Are you trying to play a game?
No, I mean,
That's making you commit on air.
Yeah, a friend made me try Traveler.
Okay.
We had like a good time with it. We did it over Zoom. It's like a sci-fi version,
Okay.
but like it was difficult with the dice rolls and the environment and everything. It was kind of complicated. But I was like, I want to try again. I want to try like something more medieval, maybe D&D or something adjacent.
Yeah. It can be very complicated, and honestly, for the sessions that I've run and what I've written, I really try to just strip down the mechanics to their essence and make it so that anyone can like come in and play, even if they've never played like a tabletop role playing game before. Because really, what people want to do is just like role play,
kind of play and imagine, yeah,
and like do like group storytelling. So. Yeah, we can definitely figure something out.
We'll follow up.
But so one of the things that I really like, so the dreams where you're not really sure what they mean, but they give you a glimpse into something that becomes almost an obsession. And for the character, right, like this a dream and these visions is what kind of spurs the character to go on this journey to kind of find out, more about what's going on. But also when it starts, I don't think this is spoiling anything, but we're starting with the character in this like really, horrible situation where they are being picked at by these vultures in this place that we're not really sure where it is. And he's having to tell a story, or keep talking. He notices that as he talks, the vultures, kind of stay at bay. And so he's spinning, or telling the story for them. And that's what like is being narrated throughout the book. So we kind of, the same way that, like Lovecraft, a lot of narrators will start out kind of at the end of the story. And then, they're just like, this is the madness that I glimpsed. And I don't even really believe it myself. So yeah, one of the elements that I really, really had a lot of fun with and kept me engaged was that kind of almost Lovecraftian element to this book. So I'm wondering, like, have you read a lot of those stories yourself, or and then there's also there's one very direct artifact from Lovecraft that, again, I won't mention it directly, but
Um, so I have read a few of the stories.
Okay.
I can't say maybe more than maybe like 4 or 5 of the short stories.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've read the critiques of Lovecraft and
Sure.
Lovecraft Country, although I haven't seen the show. So I think like the element that we're talking about, and without spoiling it, because we were at Widener Library for our research, there's a connection to Lovecraft with that library that I'd found while just looking into the library, and that plus a couple of stories I'd read have been like, oh, like this would be a nice way of referencing it. There again, the part that really directly references Lovecraft, it wasn't originally written that way. Like I had that story format, everything was done, and then I was going back and I was like, wait a second, this would be a really fun little Easter egg to kind of incorporate, and also to give homage and then also give critique at the same time.
Yeah.
What's the connection with Lovecraft and Widener Library? Widener Library is Harvard's library.
Oh, if I say what it is, it might give it up.
Oh,
yeah.
Really? Okay, I'll ask Ahmed after.
It's like very direct. Yeah, I appreciate you skirting around it.
Yeah.
Sorry, you go first.
As for like the prologue bit, though, I mean, definitely like the creepiness inspired by a lot of things I've been reading, but also just this story within a story aspect within Muslim traditions. Like the Qila wa Dimna is just story within story within story over and over and over again.
1001 Nights,
and,
yeah.
1001 Nights is like a direct reference. I mean, it's the entire thing. Like, how do you survive? By telling a story. Story is the way to live. And so that was definitely part of it. But I actually came up with the frame story like a long time ago. So even before I was thinking about these works, I had this idea. It was like a joke, actually. It was like, oh, vultures are like the audience, and they're pecking at the writer and being like, you suck. The writer should keep talking to delay them. So that's where that idea actually came from. But then it evolved and it transformed. And then during COVID, there was a period where I had some deep depression. And I think that's when I was finally able to write that terrible scene.
Yeah.
So you wrote the entirety of this during COVID? Was it 2020?
So no. So not the entirety. So I started early 2021. Which was the period of time when things were starting to improve, right? And then I kind of kept going, and then after things were after the vaccines, etc., I kept going, and I finished most of it within that year. And then the next year was a lot of just editing, and then last year coming back to it and doing some more editing.
I don't want to be like an auntie. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but do you see yourself maybe if it was possible, inshallah, could this be a career for you, or do you have plans for distributing the book?
So that's a dream. I mean, I love what I do. I love working with people, with chaplaincy. I love not being isolated all the time, but in my free time or as a second career, something else, definitely I would. That's a dream. It's really hard when you self-publish, and there's always a risk. So my sister is a full-time artist, right? And she's the first one to caution me. She's like, following your passions is really hard. And it's hard to live off of creativity. So I'm not trying to live off of creativity, but it'd be nice. But when you self-publish, when you try to distribute, it's your own networks, people and then I've gotten a lot of feedback for that, especially with the Kickstarter I did. Beyond that, I mean, I've had one Kindle sale since the start of February, so the past 3 days.
But the book is available on Kindle?
It's available on Kindle.
Okay.
It's available on Audible. I have an audiobook version out.
Nice.
It's available on Barnes & Noble's website, Apple Books, etc.
Did you record your own audio for Audible?
No, I got a narrator. So I did a Kickstarter for the book. And alhamdulillah, with the Kickstarter, had 140 backers, who really just gave a lot, mashallah, for it. And with that support, I was able to hire a narrator through audiobook. There's a website called ACX, which is kind of an Audible affiliated and Apple Books affiliated distributor. But I made it non-exclusive, so theoretically the audiobook could be reproduced elsewhere. But that's kind of the channel I went through.
Gotcha. Yeah. This is a specific question, and if it's giving anything away, just let us know and we'll cut it. But I was really interested in, I haven't seen before, this kind of idea of using the humors and kind of getting into the way that people saw the body, in terms of magic or sort of superhero sort of context. What gave you that idea, and how did you sort of decide what humor would do what?
Yeah, no, so I think around the time that I wrote the work again, I'd been binging a lot of fantasy novels and shonen manga work, and there's a lot of magic systems, and sometimes it's rooted in reality, sometimes it's not. So it's definitely inspired by all of that. And when I was thinking of kind of a native magic system, I was really attentive that I wanted everything in the work to be something that has some degree of theoretical feasibility from the sources,
Hmm.
right? Like still fantastical maybe for our world, but for beliefs at the time that this wouldn't be so crazy. So like the miracles that are wrought, the idea of baraka, etc., everything is still somewhat within the realm of like theoretical understanding of the time. And so I wanted something like this to also fit that. So humoral theory became like a really great potential source. And I'd visited Bergama in Turkey many years ago, where Galen was from. I just remember having a really, really weird experience while I was there. So it always like made me turn back to, like, he was one of the big proponents of the humors. So it always made me turn back like, oh, humors is such an interesting idea. But when I put the humors together, I based it more upon, like, I didn't have as much access towards Muslim understandings of the humors. Like I didn't go through Qanun fi Tib. So I used kind of the Western understanding of the humors, which I
Hmm.
assumed is very close, right? I mean, this is the direct transmission over here. And so some of the aspects are real in terms of like the wetness versus dryness, the different humors themselves, the different associations, those are all real. Now, whether it gives you like superpowers, blah, 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 I made that point up,
Right.
kind of refocusing or, adding degree of emphasis on those existing elements. Um, yeah.
Very cool. I also like that explanation of magical systems, of like wanting them all to be legible to your characters. I think that, yeah, that definitely lent the book like a certain cohesion that made it really enjoyable. And even if I didn't get every reference, I had a feeling that it like was fitting together for the worldview of the characters.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Like the kind of like obviously the magical, fantastical elements of this being rooted in such a long history of like storytelling in, I guess, like the quote Muslim world, and that comes out of these the golden age of Islam and all this. It really kind of also made me think a lot about, again, not that it's like you're portraying these things as like a one for one or like we're certain about this, but one of the things that I appreciate the character and about the storytelling is that it really does also focus on doubt in belief, and how that is very closely coupled with faith, right? And just kind of part of faith is, experiencing the doubt and be like, this seems a little too fantastical to be true. Do we really believe this, or do I really believe this person, or whatever? And it kind of manifests obviously in questioning, but at some point, the character is still being led by his senses and just having to trust in other people. So yeah, like I really appreciate that. I don't know if that kind of for you rings as like something that you've also experienced kind of on a spiritual journey, especially as a chaplain, or encountering a lot in like kind of giving guidance to people, but just that doubt and how we reckon with it and move forward.
Yeah, so I'll let you in on a little secret, first of all. My favorite Easter egg in the novel starts very early on, and it has to do with the narrator's name, right? So his name is Khurafa. Now, the word Khurafa in Arabic means like fantastical or fantasy, but there's a story behind the alleged origin of the word, where there's an account, Hadith Khurafa, there's Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where there's a narration in the Hadith about the story of a man named Khurafa who has these adventures with jinn.
Oh.
And yeah, exactly. It's adventures with jinn. And so like it's a fantastical account. So allegedly from that account, like this guy's name became associated with the word fantastical. Is it true? Is it not true? Is hadith even authentic? Allahu alam. God knows best. But I kept thinking about that. Oh, here's a character who's a reference to someone in, you know, an older account who has adventures with jinn, but also his name is a direct reference towards truth and fiction, the fantastical. What is fantasy? What is real? So that was kind of like from the beginning. I was like, that's going to be a. Originally, had the way I had the novel structured, his name isn't mentioned until the very end.
Mm.
But I had a few readers, and they're like, "No one's gonna get that," and I was like, "Okay, I'll put his name early."
Yeah.
It's just gonna be weird that his name's never mentioned.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's a big part of it. So definitely, it's a theme that I've thought of like a little bit, like what is reality, what is not reality, and then when thinking of storytelling, sometimes it's not about what actually happens and doesn't actually happen. And Muslim historians very much operate this way, that the goal is more so the meaning, not just that authenticity does not matter, but meaning and movement are what takes primacy sometimes. And I kind of wanted to get at that through the story. And so I think that was definitely a part of it. But this notion of like faith versus doubt and the ups and downs that come, you know, I remember reading, or hearing a narration when I was young that really stuck with me about like the companions of the Prophet peace be upon him, that they are, and like one of them's talking about experiencing doubt, like having a low, and he talks to another one. He said, "I have the same thing," and they go to another, and they just kind of gather together and like, man, our faith's up and down, up and down. And finally, they go together to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they tell him this, and he reacts with amusement because this is normal. Having these ups and downs, this cyclical kind of way of being is very, very normal. That for the Muslim, doubt is not the devil. Doubt is not the end of the world. Doubt is a way of engaging and growing and learning and grappling. And I think that notion of grappling, not just intellectually, but through action, is something that very much comes across in the story. And it's not always the healthiest thing. I think the main character really sometimes like maybe needs to process, and many other characters might need to process at different moments. But it's definitely a part of it, that this is part of the conversation of how you move forward. And it's something, I see with students quite often. I've seen with myself, these ups and downs and moves and turnarounds. But there's this notion of who are you trying to be in relation to the divine, and that being something really to hold on to throughout all of it.
And I like that two of the main characters have sort of different ways of thinking about action, it seems like Zakia, who is another really, am I saying her name right?
Yep.
Who's another really lovely character who joins our main character on his journey. She seems to feel that her action, what's the differentiation? Like her action is sort of like she does things because it feels good to do them. Like there's a slight differential there, but the sort of main thing is that they both do good deeds because they know that it's the right thing to do. How would you explain their differentiation, like between like the ways that they're motivated?
Yeah, so it was something that I was really trying to get at with like the soul references, especially that she believes that you do right, and because you want to be in a state where you want to do what is right.
She's
like
following
you align
the tradition
yourself
of like the Saint Rabia.
Exactly. So you want to do what is right, whereas Khurafa and later character Shahid are very much like following duty. I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to do this, which for her isn't good enough, or it's something that duty can be broken, right? And it can be something where it might make you fail to do what is right. Whereas in this perspective, you're trying to change who you are to orient yourself.
That's interesting. I guess I think I tracked that, but I think my takeaway, which maybe wasn't correct, or maybe just, that's the danger of writing a story, people take it differently, was sort of that both of those methods or both of those orientations were equally valid, but it was important for the main character to realize that duty wasn't the only way to go throughout the world. Like, not that he had to be like her, but that her way was also valid.
Yeah, I think there's multiple potential readings, and I think when you write a novel, like you shouldn't say like my way. I'm the author. I control what I say is the right way to interpret this, because I think that also makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I wrote it as someone who is very duty oriented and who struggles with that. That is something that definitely came to mind as I was writing. It was a little bit of a self critique that was embedded there.
That's so interesting. Do you? So, I mean, I feel like this is such a cliche question, but now I'm curious. Do you see a lot of yourself in the main character, or is there overlap?
Bits and pieces. I mean, it's the first time I was writing a long-term narrative in first person, so inevitably there can be pieces of yourself that are put in there. But the character is younger, bravery, this, that, all these different things that he grapples with are just so very different.
Right.
There's a certain snarkiness, etc., that I wish I had. but it's fun. Like I think every character channels something of yourself, or some people or other things
for sure
within them.
How old are the two children, by the way? My guess, I was picturing like 11. What was your?
Okay, that's about right. I was picturing 12 to 13. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
I'm glad I came across, because I've had a lot of people read and they're like, I thought they were like this age or that age. I purposely left it a little bit vague because I didn't want to I don't think also age is something that was felt the same way. There was like baligh and non-baligh, right? But also I wanted to, because I was writing this book in such a way that I wanted it to be something that's very accessible and open, but I wanted it to also reach like non-Muslim audiences as well as Muslim audiences even those that are more of like a conservative bent, etc., to be like, hey, no, there's benefit to this type of storytelling. So I
Mm,
was like, I'm gonna make sure like age is this, that no one can be like, what are you doing? Why are they traveling?
right.
Non-mahram.
Yeah.
It's like they're kids. And also, I really wanted to avoid like the romance trope between the
I
characters.
was
Yeah.
wondering about that. Actually,
Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, so that was an intentional choice. Did you just
that was
kind of feel like there's
intentional.
other stories to tell?
I wanted them to be sibling-like. I really wanted to
Mm.
focus on that because I think there's like a purity to the sibling relationship, and then they're relating to each other. And as I was writing it, like originally I wasn't sure because I didn't have their ages pinned down in the beginning, but then as I was going with it, I was like, no, like I think there's something about the way they pick on each other and older younger kind of vibes that
Hmm.
this sort of fits
Yeah.
better
Yeah,
for
just
me. And
kind
then I
of.
think also again because I've been reading a lot of shonen manga where it's very like neglectful to put romance in there, which I would love to write romance and everything, especially now that I'm
Yeah.
married. I feel more qualified.
Yeah. I
Astaghfirullah, but
it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was about to say, just going back to that snarkiness in your book, there are a lot of, they're encountering bad guys and monsters, and there's a lot of battles that happen throughout the book. Um, and just mixed with the snarkiness and the way that you describe these battles, like in my head, I'm imagining it feels like a comic book or an anime, because I've watched quite a few animes, and I'm like, oh, I can really see that in my head, especially with Zakiya. I was imagining her head. I don't know if you know this illustrator or this person at all, but Sarah Al-Fagi, she's a illustrator for, I think, Disney now. But if you ever get a chance to like look her up and look at her
hmm?
illustrations and characters, that's like, I imagine
Oh,
Zakiya being drawn by her.
she illustrated Squire, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I think I follow her on Instagram.
Yeah. 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 But yeah, I could definitely see that kind of anime kind of inspiration. I don't know if you meant it to come through in those battles or in maybe some of that snarkiness, but to me, it
It
felt,
was definitely there. It
yeah.
was definitely a part of it because those are the things that I was reading at the time. So like very much they were on my mind.
I
Uh,
haven't read any, but like, what have you watched that you really like that you felt inspired by?
what have I watched? I'll tell you what I read. I think the greatest manga of all time is One Piece by far.
Okay.
Vinland Saga, a few others are also really fantastic. But in terms of just like consistency of storytelling and storytelling that actually improves, even though it's so long,
Yeah.
incredible.
Question about craft. So you talked about storyboarding. So do you have kind of like, what's your method? Do you write everything out in terms of the plot and then start writing it in sections? Do you have like I'm picturing like a giant chart somewhere in your house, like a flow chart where you map out battle scenes. What's your process like?
Oh, like I wish I did it that way. No, I think I came up with a general outline of like these are the major plot beats. And because I'd been reading again these kind of like shonen manga that had a lot of arcs, and I was reading Persian epics and like Sirat narratives, etc. at the same time, which also have these sort of arcs and these up and down kind of moments. It was very much like, okay, I'll put into like slight, not quite sub stories, but little arcs in the story, and then I followed through from there. That okay, I had the arcs, now I'm going to try and write it and see what happens. And so as I was writing, there's a little bit of discovery as I was writing that
Mm,
piece. So I knew how things fit together in the long term, but on the smaller level, it was very much discovery writing. And then I think a lot of the writing process is rewriting or going back. So a lot of the
right.
connections in the story, a lot of the things where it's like, whoa, that was related to that is because I went through and I was reading it myself and I was like, wait a second, this connects with this should be there.
Abdul Rahman, how many languages can you read in?
It's the second time I've been asked that question today, and I still don't have a great answer. So, like, what do you? It depends on what you mean by
I'm guessing
read,
so. I'm
right?
guessing you can
Yeah,
read Arabic, Persian, and Turkish, right?
but I'm really bad at all of them now. They've really
I
declined
don't
since I've
believe you,
only.
but
Believe me, please. Especially Persian has gotten so weak. But theoretically, I can read them.
okay, gotcha. That's amazing, mashallah.
But I mean, you're. I imagine how many you're working with
Oh
because
my
you're also
god.
doing like anthropological modern stuff too. So
No,
it's like
dude,
a
I
whole
do
different
like
level.
Muslims in the US. I thankfully need little to no language skills.
I
Alhamdulillah.
mean, there are far more languages with Muslims in the U.S., right?
I mean, yeah, that's one way of putting it, but definitely not in my work. But anyway, very impressive. That's awesome.
That's not cool.
We were just talking earlier today about how, I mean, Arabic was my first language, but obviously now my English is much stronger than my Arabic after having grown up here my whole life. Um, but I was wanting to watch The Simpsons or like all the Harry Potters in Arabic, so I gotta find those.
That's our plan.
dubbed, but
Yeah.
Oh, nice. It'll probably be like in straight modern standard or something.
yeah, yeah.
I've heard of so many people learning like Fusha through those type of things.
I know. Yeah, that's the tricky thing is that like with Yasmin, we also want to work on like specifically like the Egyptian dialect, so that when we go.
Yeah, any modern movie. Yeah.
Yeah, any modern. I mean, everyone knows Egyptian like that, but the thing is, I just don't really understand anyone else's Arabic, or they kind of have to speak it very slowly. I just kind of, but I get it. But yeah, everyone understands the Egyptian, which I think is a blessing.
The power of the series.
Yeah.
Of Silsila, yeah.
TV does.
Yep.
It's also like, the most populated, so therefore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I know the book has just been published, so not many people have had a chance to get their hands on it and read it yet. Which again, we both highly recommend. But are there any concerns on your end that people who come to you as a chaplain have read this and they're like, "Yo, first couple pages, what the fuck is this guy up to?"
So far, no. So far, everyone has been like, no one said anything. Like, the local community where I live has been reading it. Some of my students have the book now. No one's complained yet. But if someone does, I will let you know. But I was really careful with the writing. I was like, okay, it's a little bit edgy, but like folks who know me will know that I don't mean it in a bad way. I hope.
Yeah.
Maybe there'll be a concerned parent one day or something. I don't know, but
yeah, exactly. If we ever, gain enough power to get on those same book banning and book burning,
that would be an honor.
I think this was written with a lot of care. I don't see a lot of places where you could get in trouble.
Yeah.
I guess the only thing I was thinking of, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, is I don't know if this is a good question. I didn't have an issue with it. I thought it was actually really clever and thoughtful. But I'm curious, again, because you know so much more about this time period than I do. To what extent did people talk about Boudica as if it was almost like a superhero, as we think power, as we now think about a superpower? Was that like a little bit of creative license, or do you feel like that's kind of true to how people actually talked about these Sufi saints as if they were superheroes?
So I think there's a bit of creative license. Like, the word firsat is not used the way I used it. So that was definitely just like picking a word from tradition and reappropriating it.
But you explained that in the glossary, which I think is good. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for Baraka, I mean, like, definitely there is this notion of the supernatural in sense. And the miracles thing that I mentioned in the book, pretty much all of them are rooted in some medieval sources or the other, whether they were always codified or understood this sort of way, or Baraka is this charismatic power, etc., might date a little bit later in understanding. So there might have been a little bit of an anachronism over there. But I don't think it's like too crazily out of the wheelhouse. But a little bit, yeah. Definitely codified it differently to fit fantasy
That's a good
novel.
explanation, though, that level of like believing that people could be so close to God or so touched by God that they would have like heightened senses is really interesting.
Because I was impressed, like a lot of even modern Sufis, they talk about like, oh, like someone can read faces or do this or do that. They're just so close to the divine. So I was like, ooh, like that notion of something perceptual would be interesting to include. In addition to the more miraculous, wild things.
Do you have like a not to use Boudica, because not to get potentially tricky, but if you could have like a heightened sense, what would your heightened sense be that you would want?
Wow. Well, first I would yeah.
After reading the book, I was like, I definitely would want smell. That sounds really cool.
I mean, so I'll tell you, the reason smell is in there and it's such a big part of the book is because I've actually had a terrible sense of smell my entire life.
Oh.
So this entire notion of like hallucinating smells, like that was me as a kid. I was like, is this a real smell or am I making this up? So when the character's like, am I hallucinating smells? Like, where are these smells coming from? Like, that's where that came from. And every description of flowers was really rough for me. Like, I looked up descriptions online, like, scientific explanations, etc., and I had to like put in my own words. And then I went and actually tried to smell flowers. It was like this combination of all those things.
Interesting.
It was because I have
what
no
an
idea.
Embodied practice. I love that.
Yeah, I have like no idea what any of these things smell like. But like, I had a friend who was like like very into farming, gardening, etc. Read, I think, most of the book or a large chunk, and he was like fine with it. So I was like, oh, thank Allah, like it passed the muster. But yeah, I would love to have actual barakah, like to be blessed by God, etc. Be close, like that'll be, may Allah one day give all of us that station, inshallah. But in terms of wow, yeah, I haven't really thought about that. Reading minds seems like it would be a burden.
Yeah,
that seems kind of rough, especially
it does seem kind of rough.
Experienced in the book.
Yeah, my eyesight's really bad. It might be nice to have good eyesight.
To see what is true.
And also just to see. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's actually
exactly.
a good one here because I choose not to wear
Yeah.
my glasses and it drives Ahmed crazy because I'm always relying on him. So maybe that would be
Yeah.
good for both of us.
Yeah, so he feels, he's like, everyone needs that around me.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
Nice. Anything that we haven't touched on that you wanted to share with listeners that you think is important for them to know for understanding the book?
Yeah, no, I just want to, like, it's difficult to talk about anything during this time period without talking about what's happening in the world. And I don't know when the episode's going to be released, or what timelines are, but
Tuesday, probably, or next week, Monday or Tuesday.
all right,
Yeah.
inshallah. But I mean, like, we are going through a time where there's like active genocide in the world,
Yeah.
and there's this active pain, suffering, and this, I don't know. I turn back to the idea of Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. This idea of just relying on Allah Ta'ala, that Allah, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil, like relying on Allah Ta'ala has control, remembering that, turning back to that. And I think in the book, I wrote it before everything was happening, but I was struggling about publishing it and putting it out during this time period because I had this timeline. I did this Kickstarter way before. I was like, I feel like I need to get it out now. And then I was going back through and reading it a little bit, and I was like, oh, like it's because it's rooted in the tradition. The tradition is always talking about this type of stuff, about hope in the face of grief, about striving, about being there for others, about like just planting a tree when the world is ending. That's just being this recurring theme in who we are. And I think that's something, whether listeners get the book, which I hope they do, or they don't, that just those values are something that they carry forward in all things. Because I think those are the things we need right now. And maybe some folks want a story to maybe help them along the way or just entertain them for a while. Or maybe some folks are like, nah, like fiction, genre fiction, ew. But I hope that we can all unite on that at least.
I think that's very true. And I think in addition to stories like this, a lot of people have also turned to poetry in this time, because I think
Absolutely,
it's not a form of escapism. It doesn't have to be. It can really be a form of, again, connecting to something beyond yourself and finding the capacity within yourself to keep going and connect to other people and to hopefully bring about something good in this world. And like you said, planting trees in a time of grief.
Exactly, moving towards something transcendent and beyond yourself.
Yeah.
If you notice in the book, the character, he mentions that his mother was a poet, and that's like a big part of his story and background.
Mm-hmm.
Also explains the way he talks, etc. But I didn't include any of my own lines of poetry in the stead of his mother. Because I was like, dang, like I've read so many books, like fantasy novels, where they include random poetry and stuff, and I'm usually like, was this good? I was like, I don't want to. I was like, I don't want to write something bad. Like, I don't trust myself.
Rumi was a good, yeah, can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I don't want to insult the character's mom, like.
No, I'm sure it would be fine. But that's funny. Well, Abdul Rahman Latif, thank you so much. The book is Vultures in the House of Silence. Can you tell us again where to find it?
Yes, so you can find it on Audible, Amazon, Apple Books, Barnes & Noble's online store, etc., etc. A Google search even will take you there. Vultures in the House of Silence.
Awesome. Well, please go pick it up when you get a chance. And if anyone has feedback, is there anywhere they can reach you?
Yeah, my email, arlatifauthor@gmail.com, or I would love reviews on Goodreads or Amazon or wherever.
Good. I'll do Goodreads, yeah.
I appreciate that, because like for self-published authors, like reviews are everything.
Cool.
Great.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your time, and thank you for the lovely book. I hope a lot of people hear this and go out and get it. It's a really enjoyable read and just packed with so much interesting history and
also
stories.
Also just like a lot of action, like a lot of really good action scenes,
yeah,
a lot of like good battles.
In a lot and,
yeah,
a relatively
I
small
appreciate that.
pages.
I mean, like it was fun to write.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. All right. Masalam.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum.